Hope everybody had a good lunch. We are going to kind of finish off that first session and then move into our second question. So I want to start off this one with, what's the purpose of your life? What's the purpose of your life? See, every worldview that you come in contact with is going to have to somehow or another answer this question, because everybody intuitively asks this question. Even if they come down and say, there's no purpose to life, everybody's going to ask the question. So, is it just a glorified Monopoly game? Is that what it is? Are we just going to, in the end, take an eternal dirt nap? This is what, skeptics would want you to believe. They say, I'm going to tell you what, this is what's going to happen to you. One day, whether it's an accident or you get old, we all die, right? And they're going to dress you up all nice. They're going to put makeup on you. Yes, even you guys. And they're going to put makeup on you, and then they're going to stick you in this really expensive wooden box. And they're going to get a bunch of people to come up and lie about you and tell you, everybody, how great you were. Then they're going to go out and they're going to put you 6 feet in the ground, and they're going to dump some dirt on you, and they're going to say a few words. Everybody's going to go back to the church, and they're going to eat potato salad, drink coffee, go home, and then life's going to move on. That's kind of the message of Ecclesiastes, isn't it? That's what it feels like. Everything is meaningless. And the question that we have to answer is, what's the purpose of life? Are we simply molecules in motion? That is the thing that atheists are going to be telling, our young people, or that's what they're teaching, is, did you know that you are nothing more than a can of soda? You pop that can of soda, what does it do? Pop. Sorry, I forgot I'm in the Midwest. What happens when you pop that can of pop? It fizzes. That's it, right? It's just a chemical reaction. They say that's all you are. Free will is an illusion. Isn't that a good trick by the devil? Free will is just an illusion, and you are nothing more than just molecules in motion. Now, ideas have consequences, don't they? Because if you're going to believe something like that, if you take it to its logical conclusion, I don't know how you put anybody in jail. Think about it. Free will is an illusion. You are nothing more than reacting to chemicals in your head. You're not making those decisions. You're just reacting. All you can really say about murderers and rapists and people who do all sorts of crimes is they just have chemical reactions, not that are bad, because we're going to talk about how you can't even say that, but they just have chemical reactions that we don't like for our society. So we're going to put them in a box. But you can't say that they did something morally wrong. But here's what I want to impress upon you. When you're talking to anybody who may have doubts or, doesn't believe in Christianity, we need to get them to understand everybody, Christians and non-Christians and Buddhists and Muslims, everybody starts on a level playing field. We all come to the same universe. We all come to the same crime scene, if you will, as detectives, and we all have the same pieces of evidence. The question is, how are we interpreting that evidence? So, I put up here that science is built on the foundation of immaterial realities that theism, which is what we are, we believe in one God, not atheism, can explain. So what are some of the foundational building blocks that science is built upon? Well, you got orderly natural laws. That's something that we presuppose going in. We believe that we live in an orderly universe. We can test these things and see what's going on, and we don't just have random things happening. There's a reason why we call them laws, because this is what generally happens. We got the law of causality. We live in a world of cause and a... Come on, cause and effect. Yeah, there we go. All right, wake up from lunch. We believe in the laws of logic. Right? This is what we presuppose going in. When you do science, you're presupposing that the scientist has an ability to reason, don't you? Everybody say yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Reason, free will. We believe people have free will, even though I just said some scientists will deny it. We're still going into this believing that we have the ability to look at things and make choices. Realism. Realism is simply the idea that we're not in the Matrix right now. You guys remember the Matrix?
Yeah.
You're hooked up to a machine. You got that big old thing sticking out the back of your head. We believe that our five senses are reliable, that we are viewing the real world, that we're not hooked up to some sort of probe machine by a bunch of aliens and we're floating around Mars right now or some other planet that we may have never heard of. So we presuppose that going in, that the reality that we view is real. It's not make-believe. Or you can even say that history wasn't created 5 minutes ago and we were all just implanted with memories that are fake. Realism says that's baloney. And then morality. This is an important one. It's important to remember that scientists are people. And all people are flawed, right? And everybody, including us, has our biases. So scientists have their biases too. And we presuppose morality. That is, we presuppose, or at least we're hoping so, that when they go and interpret the data, that they're going to come to some sort of decision and then explain to us accurate facts. That they're not going to lie, twist the data, hide the data if it doesn't fit with what they want. Now that doesn't always happen, but we still presuppose morality. Now philosophy is part of science. You guys understand that when somebody gets a PhD, you know what the P stands for? Philosophy. Yeah, that's right. There you go. Philosophy. So when you're doing science, philosophy will determine the rules of science, we've already talked about, during science, and then after science, this is the kicker. Philosophy determines how you interpret the data. Let me give you an example. Your philosophy is you are a naturalist. That is, you do not believe in anything supernatural. The universe, material things, is all there is, all there was, and all there ever will be, to quote Carl Sagan. So, if that's what you presuppose going in, and you come across some evidence that really seems to point that something miraculous happened, you have to say what?
Don't have enough data.
Well, don't have enough data, or it can't lead to that direction. It's got to follow this way because we already know miracles are impossible.
Right.
Well, you don't know that. You're just presupposing that. So your philosophy will determine how you interpret the data. And I'll give you a really good example. When we get to the last talk and we're talking about the resurrection, I'm going to talk to you about presuppositions. I'll give you a really cool case study. You guys get to be detectives, and I'll show you about presuppositions and what that means. But this was a very candid statement by Richard Lewontin, a Harvard geneticist. And he said this: "We take this out of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated, just-so stories. Because we have an a priori," that means before you ever get to any evidence, we have this. We've already made up our minds, a commitment to materialism. Materialism is the worldview that says there is nothing supernatural. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, we are forced. See, it's not the evidence. We are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes. What he just said is, the evidence doesn't lead us that way. It's our philosophical presupposition that forces us to only come up with material causes. And he comes here at the end, "Moreover, that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Why not?
Because everything else doesn't exist. You've already made up that mind.
You've already made up your mind. Now, I believe that the elephant in the room, and we're going to talk about this, I believe the elephant in the room is morality. Right? Because if you allow a divine foot in the door, that divine foot comes with some rules and regulations. Because he created you and you are accountable to him. But when you do away with God, you're not accountable to anybody. Right? So, that's my personal opinion. Now, this is kind of the seminar that I typically do, and I talk to you guys about how we're kind of changing that up and expounding upon it for this. But this is called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," probably like one of the longest book titles of all time. The book is written by Norman Geisler. Some of you may recognize that name. And then Frank Turek. This was the conference that I said I went down to in Charlotte, North Carolina. You had to do a lot of stuff to get there, and I read the books and did all this other stuff, but they train you. So this seminar is semi-based off of this thing. So if you're interested in diving deeper into some of the stuff we're talking about, I would highly suggest getting that book. Again, don't agree with everything in it, but it's very good the way it's laid out and the evidence that they present. But we're going to start off with this: does truth exist? Oh, let me say this real quick. So does truth exist? The reason why I wanted to start off with this, look, George did a great job talking earlier about how the scriptures can bring us wise into salvation. When we get to, not the next talk, but then this evening, Okay, I'm going to do 2 sessions this evening on is the New Testament reliable. That's where we're going to really dive into how do we use the Scriptures, right? People talk about contradictions in the Scriptures, or the Scriptures have historical mistakes, or this or that. We're going to really dive in and say, nope, you can use the Scriptures to show that the Scriptures are reliable. Okay, we're going to do that. But we have to do a little bit of preliminary work before we can get to that point. The reason why we're doing that preliminary work is because there's some people who will come to you and say, that's not enough for me, for you to show me that the Bible is reliable, because they, again, people aren't always consistent, but they'll still have hang-ups. They'll still have hurdles. And plus, you'll get these people who will go, I don't even believe there's absolute truth. You got your Bible, it's reliable, that's true for you, not true for me. Well, what do you do with that? Well, we're going to show you. But I wanted to encourage you here. Here's some pictures from a Pennsylvania Christian Teen Convention. I was giving a talk, an apologetic talk on the resurrection. And I want you to look at this. I mean, I'm not boasting about myself, because these kids didn't know me from Adam. I simply put out the title, A CSI Investigation of the Resurrection. That was the title. And look at this. I got kids on the floor all over here. There was, see this guy right here? He goes to our church. There was 40 kids in the hallway. The seats go all the way back here. I must have had about 150, 200 kids in this room. I mean, and there was 4 or 5 different workshops going on at one time, and I probably had, 2/3 of the kids come to mine. Again, not boasting about myself, just saying what I'm pointing out is the generation that is coming up is thirsty. They're thirsty. And here's the thing. We got what they need. We have the truth. Doesn't Paul tell Timothy the church is the pillar and support of the truth? Yes, he does. So we have answers that we can give them. We just have to do our homework. And I want to put this, isn't philosophy an enemy? Right? I mean, you look at Colossians chapter 2, verse 8, it says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception. We say, Billy, let's stick with theology, leave all that philosophy stuff, behind us. Is that really what Paul was getting at here? Is that what he was talking about? Well, let's answer that question. C.S. Lewis, great mind. Here's what he said. Good philosophy must exist if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered. It's true. You got people who are out there and they got bad philosophy. We as Christians, need to be able to answer them. Does that mean everybody needs to be a professional philosopher? Absolutely not. But we at least need to have our homework done so we can point people in the right direction, even if we aren't skilled in that area. Well, let's look at what Paul actually said. Let's finish out that verse. The empty deception in the philosophy that Paul was talking about is according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, instead of the philosophy that's according to who? That's according to Christ. And also, I like St. Augustine, even though we disagree a lot theologically, I really like this quote that he has here. Moreover, if those who are called philosophers, and especially the Platonists, have said aught that is true, and in harmony with our faith, we are not only to shrink from it, but to claim it for our own use, for those who have unlawful possession of it. He goes, look, we don't need to shy away from philosophers, and we don't need to try to deny it. He goes, that's our truth. Why is it our truth? Because we're Christians, and we serve God. The idea is, all truth is God's truth. Can I get an amen to that one? All truth is God's truth. Look, if there's truth in science, it's God's truth, because he's the one who created the world. If there's truth in math, that's God's truth, because he created laws of logic. If there's truth in Revelation, it's God's truth, because he's the one who revealed it. And if there's truth in philosophy, it's God's truth. All truth is God's truth. So we don't need to put up these dichotomies between science and faith, or between faith and philosophy. It's all God's. Okay? It all belongs to him. And this is Clement of Alexandria. He's an early church father in the 2nd century. He said this. For this, he's talking about philosophy being the handmaid of theology. Because I don't want anybody mistaking me to think that, philosophy comes first, theology comes second. No, that's baloney. Philosophy is subservient to theology. And he says, for this, talking about philosophy, was a schoolmaster. You guys remember that term from Scripture? Galatians chapter 3. For this was a schoolmaster to bring the Hellenistic mind as the law for the Hebrews to Christ. So he goes, just like the law was a tutor to bring people to Christ, so God used philosophy to bring the Greeks one step closer to the truth. Now, George made a great point earlier. He said, look, these people like Plato and Socrates, they didn't have anything on biblical revelation, and he's so true. But they had more than some others. Just have you ever heard of Aristotle's, the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause? I mean, these guys are reasoning and coming into their mind that there's got to be some sort of first potential cause to all other causes. And so they were getting there, but they were still in the dark. That's why Paul says that, basically things were brought to light through the gospel. The gospel brings people all the way home. But there's stepping stones along the way. The law obviously was a big one, but philosophy can be used. So what is truth? What is truth? I think it's best summed up like this. You can't handle the truth. You guys remember that? It's a great movie, kind of. We remember here Tom Cruise asking him, I want the truth. You want the truth? Well, you can't handle the truth, right? Great scene. Truth is telling it like it is. Unfortunately, our society doesn't understand truth anymore. Our society doesn't understand truth anymore. And I would say that there's three principal reasons why people reject truth. There's three principal reasons. We like to think that everybody rejects certain things for intellectual reasons. And that's a reason why people might reject something, for intellectual reasons. But what I have found is that most people who are skeptics use intellectual reasons as a smokescreen for the other two reasons. And here's the other two reasons. Emotional. That is, people will be scarred by either a preacher or somebody in the church will hurt them. Or maybe it was their father who claimed to be a Christian, who will hurt them. And they will reject God because that was their representation of God. Right? And they will reject God. This is what I said earlier about Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, is that I don't believe in God and I hate him. They have that contradiction. They don't believe in God, but they really talk very angry about him. All right? So you got people who will reject for emotional reasons. And you can't just bombard them with facts, because they don't need facts. They need healing. They need to meet the great physician. But then you get this third one, which is most difficult to use, is volitional reasons. It's a matter of the heart. They don't want to believe. I literally talked to a man who was a homosexual, and I was talking to him one day. He said this to me. He said, Billy, if Jesus showed up live from the dead, sat here, we were eating at Waffle House, so if he sat here right beside us, showed me the holes in his hands, and he, whatever, I still would not stop being a homosexual. I said, okay, never talk to you about Jesus again. Because you don't want to believe. You don't want to accept the truth. There's nothing I can give you. I just pray for you. God will soften your heart. But when a man hardens his heart, raw facts isn't going to be able to bring him around. Okay, so we're going to talk about the law of non-contradiction. This helps us discover what is false. The opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. So, for example, the earth is round and the earth is not round. We all understand that this is a contradiction. Will we agree with that? Right? See, philosophy isn't that hard. This applies to religious claims as well. Remember we said all truth is God's truth? Let's not have this idea that, you have facts in science and then you have religious claims. No, truth is truth. Okay? If there's something true in religion, it's true. You don't have two different types of, areas of truth here, where you have, one standard for one and one standard for the other. Truth is truth. If Jesus is alive from the dead, that's as true as 2 + 2 = 4. If he's still dead, that's as true as 2 + 2 = 4. Truth is truth. Now, the law of non-contradiction. Here we got a man named John Lennox, which, by the way, he's a Oxford professor. He's a Christian, in a general sense, if you want to use it in that sort of term. He's a really cool guy. Like I said, I like British accents, so it's really cool to listen to these two guys debate, because you just get both British accents the whole time. Richard Dawkins, probably one of the most popular atheists of our day, and he also teaches at Oxford. One says God exists, one says God does not exist. Can they both be true? Why? Because of the law of non-contradiction, right? They both can't be true. We understand that intuitively. And I like what one person said about this when these two guys have debated on a few occasions. They said it's like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. Because John Lennox is like this really jolly guy. He's really nice, really cool. And Richard Dawkins is like snotty and just mean and angry. And he'll be all critical and criticize and just nasty. And he'll just laugh, talk to him. Like, if you're ever interested, go watch one of their debates. It's really cool quite interesting. But both can't be right. One of them has to be wrong. It's like, imagine if you were walking down the road and or you got in an elevator, saw somebody you know, you see the woman, right? She's clearly, looks like she's pregnant, which I have learned you never ask.
Yeah.
You never ask. You wait for, I mean, I don't care if they're 9 months, right? You do not ask. If they have a shirt that says expecting one, you still don't ask. You wait for them to offer it up. And let's just say you lose that ability to reason at that moment and have wisdom. And you ask, when's the baby? And the guy says, oh, we're not pregnant. And she says, oh, you know, we're pregnant in like, you know, a month. And you go, okay, cool, and you walk away. Does that make any sense? No. Why? Because you either are pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can't be like kind of pregnant. You can't be both pregnant and not pregnant at the same time. Why? Because of the law of non-contradiction. So, this law of non-contradiction is undeniable. Even those who use it deny it. This is fun, right? Get somebody who tries to deny it sometime. I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. What do you say? Yeah, you do. They say, no, I don't. You say, yeah, you do. They say, no, I don't. And you say, you're using it right now to contradict me. You get it? You follow? Some of you are thinking, you're like, man, I had too much lunch for this, Billy. Here's a quote by a medieval philosopher. Anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. You guys got that one. I don't advocate that sort of tactics when it comes to evangelism, but I think we all get the point here. Yeah, so here's the truth about truth. The truth about truth. Number one, truth is discovered, not invented. Truth is discovered, not invented. When we figure something out, we figured it out. It was always there. 2 plus 2 has always equaled 4. Right? You throw a ball up, it comes down. You figure it out because of the law of gravity. Law of gravity always worked. It did not work just because we didn't understand it. It always worked. Number 2, truth is transcultural. Sometimes people will come from the East, from like India, and tell you, hey, you know, we have a different type of way to do truth over there. You guys think this sort of logical way, we think this sort of logical way. No, that's ridiculous. The laws of logic are transcultural. If 2 plus 2 equals 4 for me, it's the same thing for the guy in China. I don't care what part of the world he's from, truth is truth for all cultures. Truth is unchanging. Truth doesn't change. What does change, though? Well, yeah. Beliefs. Beliefs change, right? George pointed this out as well. A lot of things in science have changed. We're going to show some of those here in a minute. But truth has always been there. It's just our interpretations of the data have changed. Beliefs cannot change a fact. Do not tell me that some guy with a PhD, just because he believes it, is true. I don't care. I don't care if everybody in America tells me that something is true. Because truth is not decided by majority vote. Right?
Correct.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Beliefs can't change a fact. All truth is absolute. There's no such thing as a relative truth. And so we're going to go through this here, and I'm going to show you how to use this. So all truth is absolute. Something that is true for all persons, all times, and all places. Can you think of a relative truth? Can you think of something that's only true for you and not true for other people? You say, go ahead, Terry.
I'm married to Lisa Carter.
But it's true for all people at all times and all places that you are married to her.
That's true.
That's true. Or you say, well, Billy, you know, it's true that I'm cold right now. Right? Maybe you need a little bit more iron in your blood. Well, it's true for all people at all times and all places that you are cold right now. Truth is truth for all people at all times and all places. I'm going to give you guys a really simple way to be able to refute postmodernism. It's called applying the claim to itself. And let's do an example. What if somebody said, I can't speak a word in English? You just did, right? Didn't you just say that in English? Listen, you will be seen, you young people, I'm telling you, you use this tactic right here, you will be seen as a super genius. It's called the Roadrunner tactic. You guys might not remember this, but how many of us remember this cartoon? So here we got Wile E. Coyote. He'd go, okay, so you remember it? Good. You go running off that cliff, and before you know it, you look down, and what's not there?
The ground.
The ground. When you apply these claims to themselves, what you're going to do to these skeptics or these people, they're caught up in these sort of belief systems, is they're going to realize, I got nothing to stand on right now. And they're going to have a choice to make, and that's on them, but at least you open up their eyes to it. All right, so we got the Roadrunner tactic. Here's the first one. There is no truth. Apply the claim to itself. What would you ask?
And how can you say that?
Close.
Are you sure that's true?
Close. Is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, you just did what? Contradicted yourself, since the law of non-contradiction. It's true that there's no truth. And you scratch your head and say, wait a second. All right, the second one. All truth is relative. This one's a bit harder. We might say it like this. Somebody might say, there is no absolute truth. Are you absolutely sure? So we would ask, is that a relative truth? Is it just true for you that all truth is relative? You see how we're contradicting ourselves right here? You can think about these when you kind of digest that food for a little bit. That's why I'm giving them to you. All right, this next one. There is no truth in religion, only in science. Now, what must we ask ourselves maybe before we respond to them? We say, is that a scientific truth? Who said that? Yeah. Is that a scientific truth claim? Did that guy, is that claim, can you put that in a beaker and break down the chemicals of it? No. What is this? Starts with a P. It's a philosophical statement. That is a philosophical statement. This is great, right? You can go watch a little 3-minute YouTube video. William Lane Craig, Christian apologist, one of the most famous in the world, was debating this guy named Peter Atkins. And this is what's great about it, right? You know how the Bible says don't answer a fool according to his folly, but answer a fool as his folly deserves. This is one of the most perfect examples of this. So William Lane Craig is debating this guy, Peter Atkins. And Peter Atkins basically challenges William Lane Craig. He goes, well, science is what tells us truth. And he goes, do you deny that? And William Lane Craig was like, absolutely, I deny that. And Peter Atkins goes, well, I challenge you to give me something, give me truth that's not found in science. And William Lane Craig goes, oh, I'll give you 5. And this is for your blanks. Ready? So he gives him 5. And he says this. He goes, yeah, morality. He goes, morality is not found in science. Right? Just go ahead and write these down. They're not going to come up here. He says, morality is not found in science. What we determine is right and wrong is not found by some sort of chemical reaction in the test tube. Number 2, ethics. Or I'm sorry, that was, I guess, part of morality. Number 2 would be aesthetics. Couldn't even read my own handwriting there. Aesthetics would be I think that certain painting looks good. I like the Starry Night, or I like the Mona Lisa, right? But you can't take that into a laboratory and tell me why I think that's beautiful. That's not a scientific thing. Metaphysics. That has to do with the things beyond physics. Number 4, the laws of logic. The laws of logic are immaterial. Did you hear that? The law of non-contradiction is not a physical thing. It is an immaterial law. Therefore, you cannot test it through the scientific method. And then science itself, the scientific method, is again built on philosophy. So did you guys get that 5? Okay. So he gives him 5, and then look, here's the best part. The moderator looks at Peter Atkins and says, put that in your pipe and smoke it. And the whole crowd was just they just laughed at him. Answer a fool as his folly deserves. So turn the claim on itself. There is no truth in religion, only in science. Is that a scientific claim? That's a philosophical claim. No one has the truth. What are they presupposing? That they have the truth. Now, how do you know that's true? The only way you can know that's true is if you did what? What would you have to do? To say nobody has the truth, what do you have to do beforehand?
You have to know everybody.
You got to know what everybody in the universe knows. To be able to say, I've interviewed everybody, and nobody has the truth, right? And if you guys go to college, some of you young people, if you go to college and a professor tells you this, raise your hand and ask them this question. Why am I even here? If nobody has the truth, then why am I sitting in your class to listen to you tell me that nobody has the truth? You understand what I'm talking about here? All right. Here's the next one. You should doubt everything. I had a cousin who I was trying to talk to about Christianity, and he just kept basically saying, well, that may be true, but I'm skeptical about this, da-da-da. Essentially, his burden of proof was 100%. I need 100% confirmation of everything. That's just unrealistic. We don't function that way in the universe anymore, or at all. In our everyday lives, we don't function that way. But that was his burden of proof. And so, people will say, well, you should doubt everything. What would you answer that?
I doubt that.
Should I doubt that? Has anybody ever doubted Christianity? I have. It's okay. We've all got doubts before. We wake up in the morning, we're real tired, kind of cranky, don't know if Jesus exists, had that first cup of coffee, then we know God is good. Right? Then we know God is good. Has anybody ever doubted their doubts? I doubt it. Some of y'all got it. Then this is the best one. If they really don't like you, what do they say? You ought not judge. Right? Now this one's really easy. What do you say? Stop judging me! Right? Isn't that a judgment? You look like a super genius. If somebody goes, well, you shouldn't judge, and you look back at them and you go, hey, you listen to me, you judgmental judger. You stop judging me for judging people. But does the Bible say you ought not to judge? Not like that. Not what they mean. It's talking about hypocritical judgment. The Bible tells us in many places that we are supposed to judge. All right? And we all know this. It's all common sense. You're not going to say, well, I know the guy's a pedophile, and he applied to be my babysitter for my kids, but I'm not supposed to judge him. Yeah, right. Try to work in reality like that. The Bible tells us in many places to judge people. John 7:24, 1 Corinthians 5:12, judge those inside the church. 1 Corinthians 6:2, we'll judge the world. Matthew 18, church discipline. Matthew 23, Jesus condemns the Pharisees. 1 John 4:1, test the spirits. All over the place the Bible tells us to judge. It just talks about righteous judgment. So summary, contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything is true, but everything can't be true, and objective truth cannot be denied without being affirmed. Here's an easy way to do it, right? You could give this illustration. Let's say you're leaving here, you're going home, you're speeding down the highway, cop pulls you over, right? He goes, you know why I pulled you over? I have no idea, officer. You were doing 80 and a 55. And you say, ha, that's true for you, not true for me, and you speed off. You think that's going to work out for you?
We'll find out, absolutely.
You go, yeah, that's right. Then you go to the bank. You speed into the bank and you say, hey, I'd like to get $6,000 out. I'm going to buy myself a motorcycle. And the guy says, all right, you have $3.12 in your account. And you say, that's true for you, not true for me. Just give it to me. We don't function that way in the real world. Nobody can live like that. So why would we think that this applies to religious claims? All right. Get through this. Here we go. Next point. Does God exist? Does God exist? We're going to give you 3 arguments that help show you that God exists. And we're going to talk about the theistic God. The theistic God. There's 3 major religious worldviews. You got theism. That is, God made everything, right? So you see the hand holding up the world. The second one is pantheism. God is all. You want to know what pantheism is? Use the Force, Luke. That's pantheism, okay? Then atheism. There's no God at all. All right? So those are pretty much your 3 major worldviews. Pretty much all religions fit into those 3 worldviews. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, theism, Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, New Ageism, and then religious humanism or materialistic naturalist or any of those other sort of terms you want to use for that. So there are 3 arguments. You got the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. Those are big fancy words, really not important. Cosmological argument comes from the word cosmos, which means the world. So this one shows that the world had an absolute beginning. Teleological from teleos, which means perfect or complete. So that one deals with the fine-tuning of our universe. And then the last one, the moral argument, pretty simple. It deals with morals. Essentially, it says that if there's one thing that is objectively wrong, then God exists. All right, let's go over the cosmological argument. The argument is formulated like this. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. Anybody want to deny that? I don't think so. Huh?
Something caused it to begin.
Yep. Everything that has a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning. That's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And therefore, it does conclude that the universe had a cause. So what we have to argue is point B. The universe had a beginning. Because if it did, then it follows that the universe had a cause. So we only have two possibilities here. That there is a beginning or there's no beginning. There's only two possibilities because of another law of logic, which is called the law of excluded middle. Kind of goes back to that whole you're either pregnant or not pregnant thing. There's no middle ground. So you either had a beginning or you didn't have a beginning. There is no third option. The question is, which way does the evidence point? Big Bang. Now we go, hey, Billy, we're a bunch of Christians here. We don't believe in this whole Big Bang thing, right? I think it's okay to believe in the Big Bang. As long as you say, I just know the one who said, make it go bang, right? And with the caveat that we would say, we don't believe in the Big Bang and all the implications or inferences that people might draw from it, like the age of the universe or, evolution, or maybe some other things that people try to extrapolate. But I'm okay with believing that our universe, space-time and matter, came into being at a finite point in the past. I just think that God did it. I think the Bible's right. When the Bible says, God said, let there be light. The Bible tells us what God did, and like George said today, it's not a scientific book. It doesn't give us a lot of details about how He did it. Okay? But it does tell us some aspects of how He did it. So Stephen Hawking is one of the most famous physicists. I think, I'm pretty sure physicist there. He said, he's the guy in the wheelchair. I'll show you a picture of him later. You'll recognize him. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. This is important because scientists earlier on in the 20th century did not believe in the Big Bang. It's a relatively new view. They used to believe in what's called a static universe, or that the universe was eternal. And if the universe is eternal, what do you not need? You don't need a God. You don't need a creator. If the universe is eternal, it had no beginning, therefore it doesn't need a cause. All right. And Alexander Vilenkin. He is one of three guys that formulated the Vilenkin-Guth-Boyd theory. Boyd theory. I know, right? You guys are just ecstatic that I just told you that. He says this, with the proof. Wow. Usually scientists say it implies, it points to, or it seems to say. He uses a strong word, with the proof. Now in place, cosmologists, those who study the beginnings of our universe, can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. How is it a problem? Because if you have a beginning, you have to have a cause. And that cause has to be outside of whatever is going on there, right? So that cause has to be outside of our universe. Now, Vilenkin and his buddies, to get around this idea of God as the cause, this is where the multiverse theory comes from. You guys ever heard of the multiverse? Essentially, it is that our universe is only a blip on the radar of the greater universe or multiverse that essentially just spontaneously shoots off these other smaller universes, and we just happen to be in this one. But there's this random sea of energy, this, area of fluctuation, and it's goofy. You know what's goofy about it? Guess how much evidence there is for it?
Probably not.
Zero. There is not one shred of evidence for it. But they're forced to go that route because the only other route is that God exists. So, scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. I'm going to give you an acronym to make it easy to remember. I think I'll put it in your notes. Surge. There you go. The first one is the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is expanding. Radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, and then Einstein's general theory of relativity. All right, so let's go over these quickly. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that the universe is running down. It is running out of energy. Not that energy goes away. We understand that. But that our usable energy is turning into unusable energy. So we can say the universe is like a cell phone, right? And you get your cell phone out, you realize, hey, got off the charger, pretty good to go, right? What happens, though, in just a few hours? It starts going down, especially if you got it hooked up to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It starts running down. See the teenagers starting to freak out because they've been in that moment. Here's when critical mass hits, when you see it get down to that point. People start to lose their minds at that point, right? My cell phone's, gotta find a charger right now, right? Now, there's only so much juice in your batteries. And it's because of the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us that simply everything is running down. Everything goes towards chaos. Things don't go from chaos to order. Things go from order to chaos. The second law of thermodynamics is why you have to put gas in your car. So this is a piece of evidence. We could go into this. If you're interested, you can read something called Hilbert's Hotel. And essentially it is a cool little illustration, a philosophical illustration about a hotel on why you can't have an infinite past. So the second law of thermodynamics simply says this. Look, if your battery is winding down, then at one point it was wound up. So if it's dying, at one point it had a charge. The universe goes towards disorder. Let me just touch on this for a second. So let's say you had a box of colored styrofoam or whatever sort of balls. You color-coded them, you know, red on top, then blue, then green. And you had room in the box for them to move around. And you threw that box into the ocean. And you took it out 10 years later. Are they all going to be exactly how you put them in there? Why?
Every item being expended upon it
changes it. It just, because this is the way our universe works. The universe always takes order and breaks it down. That's something that I just want to impress upon you guys. And again, if you want to read kind of more into this, just study up on the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is constantly breaking things down. But I'm just pressing on for the sake of time. The universe is expanding. This one's cool. So imagine the universe like a balloon, right? And you put two dots on the balloon. And let's say they're an inch apart. And you start to blow the balloon up. What happens to those dots? They get further and further apart. Now, in 1929, a man named Edwin Hubble. Anybody ever heard of him? After the Hubble telescope? Yes, this is why he became famous. Because in 1929, at Mount Wilson Observatory in California, he points that telescope out into the universe. And what he sees is this thing called the red ship. Now, they didn't necessarily know what was going on at that time. But here's what they figured out. From the red ship, they noticed that the universe, that things are expanding. And here's what blows my mind. And I don't know, because I'm not a scientific guy. I'll just let you guys know I'm not a scientific guy. That's my weak area when it comes to apologetics. Right? So I try to rely on other people and give you quotes to kind of help out, show you that I'm just not making this stuff up. But they saw that the universe is expanding, and they said, you know, if you were to reverse this process, right? You're tracing it, going out. Let's say the dots are 1 inch apart, and then they expand every, let's say, minute, they get another inch apart, right? So at 10 minutes, how far are they going to be apart? 10 inches, right? And then you trace that back, eventually, what are you going to come back to? You're going to come back to a point of, and here's the kicker, nothing. Because if you continue to reverse the process and you go back and back and back and back and back and back and back, eventually you get to a point where, you know, the expanding is going back to a point of an absolute beginning. So let's see what those implications are for that. This is our buddy Peter Atkins again in the Creation Revisited. He said, we go back in time beyond the moment of creation. Stop for a second. Beyond time, beyond the moment of creation. What does that sound like? To when there was no time and to where there was no space. So we go to a time when there was no time. And we go to a space before creation. Hello, McFly. A time where there was no time and a space before there was space. And he spends the remainder of this chapter of this book trying to hurdle his way and weave his way around doing all this sort of other stuff. And again, he was having another debate with with William Lane Craig, and William Lane Craig took him to task and pretty much said, you're doing pop metaphysics. That is, you're just making things up as you go along. You have zero evidence, and in fact, you contradict yourself, as we just saw here. Time before no time, a space where there was no space. He goes, now you're just making things up. You have zero evidence for it, and you're only doing it because you don't want to believe in God.
Well, he proves creation right there.
Yeah.
There was a time before creation, that means there has to be a creation.
Well, we see that this is called equivocation, where you kind of use a word in two different senses, but you don't tell the people you're using it in two different senses. And so let's go to a point, we all have a refrigerator, right? Look at all this. You got water and vegetables and juice and yogurt, right? And then you get this teenager walks in. And what does he say?
Yeah.
But then he goes, Mom! There's nothing to eat in the fridge! Now, is there really nothing to eat in the fridge? There's nothing good to eat. There's nothing that he desires to eat. But when we say nothing, what could we take that to mean? You open up the fridge and there's what? Literally nothing. There's zero food. There's no calories in the fridge to consume. But that's not how he means it. I'll point this out because this is what a lot of skeptics will do. They'll say, now, there was nothing, and then they'll start talking about mathematical properties. Or they'll start talking about this random sea of fluctuation. And you have to take a step back and go, wait a second. Mathematical theorems and points are still something. Or random seas of fluctuation of energy is still something. So you got to realize these people contradict themselves, or they're not even completely honest, or they don't follow their logic all the way home. And you have to watch out for that equivocation that they do on nothing. Because when we hear nothing, we hear what Aristotle defined nothing as, which is what rock's dream about. You guys got it? What is nothing? What rock's dream about? That's nothing. When we say nothing, we mean zero, absolutely nothing. But a lot of these skeptics, when they say nothing, they mean something else other than nothing. So you got to be careful with that. And so we have to say this. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. How many people have seen that movie? Yes. All right, so we got a few. Good movie. Yeah, that's a good movie right there. Now, in 1948, scientists predicted that this beginning, right, with this big explosion, Fred Hoyle, which we'll talk about, we'll show a couple quotes about him. Fred Hoyle actually kind of tried to mock this, and he's the one who goes, what are you going to call it, a Big Bang? And it stuck. So that's where the word Big Bang came from, actually a mock of the theory. They thought that because if there's going to be a big explosion, right, usually something explodes, it creates a lot of mess, debris, heat, noise, a lot of radiation, right? Yeah, there you go. Somebody's cheating on their notes. So they predicted, hey, we should find some heat remnant left over, right? Like, you know when you cut off your tube TV, what do you see? You see that glow. Like if you're in a dark room, you cut off your tube TV, you see a glow. All right, so this is Robert Wilson and Arnold Penzias. And they discovered in 1965, they won a Nobel Prize for it in 1978. You see that big old antenna behind them? So they were there at this laboratory in New Jersey. And essentially, they were like, man, we keep pointing this thing out, and all we get is static. Right? So they went outside, and they saw there was a bunch of pigeons that were defecating on their antenna. And so they got it all cleaned up, and they knocked the pigeons away, and they got it all, working again. And they pointed out into space, and guess what they found? Static. And they said, well, what's going on here? Well, eventually what they came to find is that static was the radiation afterglow. It's this heat remnant from the initial Big Bang. Now, again, I'm not advocating all the deductions that people try to make from this sort of stuff and the age of the universe and how stuff worked out. But it's interesting that we're starting to formulate some different lines of scientific facts that show, hey, look, this beginning, what sort of scientific theory is good? One that can what? Predict stuff. That can predict things that the way our world's going to work. And so what I'm showing you is people are going, okay, if the Big Bang is going to be true, then here's some things that we might predict. And what I'm showing you is that those predictions actually were continuing to be discovered. What they found with that static is that they found light and heat. Now the light couldn't be visible anymore because it was stretched out so far. Again, I'm not a scientist and I don't know about light and theories of light, so you can study that on your own. But what they found was the heat. Okay? Now, this is what they said. Robert Jastrow, who now sits in Hubble's chair, he said, no explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. The clincher, which is convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in the Great Explosion. So he goes, it's pretty much convinced the scientific world that this radiation afterglow comes from the universe exploding out of nothing. Now again, as Christians, we know, why did it explode out of nothing? Because God said, let there be light. All right. Now, they also said, look, if we're going to have this heat from the initial explosion, usually when things blow up, it's kind of, somebody said it earlier, kind of creates some chaos, right? And you don't have things blowing up that then create like wonderful pieces of art, right? You don't set a bomb off in Home Depot and all of a sudden, you build a wonderful countertop set. Right? So from disorder doesn't come order. But what they said is, you know what? If you have this big explosion and you have this heat, then it had to be so finely tuned so as to allow life. Because if it was too hot, what would it have done? Burned everything up. And if it was too cold, the universe would have collapsed back on itself. And so back in 1992, they sent up this satellite after a couple different tries and some trial and error. It's called the Kobe satellite. Another guy, George Smoot, found the Nobel. He got the Nobel Prize in 2006 for finding these great fine tunings. I thought I had another slide there. And essentially, this is what he said. We found the machining marks of the Creator. If you're religious, it's like looking at God. Not a Christian. Not a Christian. And he says it's like you're looking at God. Now the last line of evidence is Einstein's theory of relativity. So in 1916, he essentially was formulating this theory that space, time, and matter are correlative. This is important, and we're going to end with this. That space, time, and matter are correlative. That is, you can't have space without time and matter. You can't have time without matter and space. You can't have matter without space and time. Okay? All three have to be there. Here's the kicker. If space, time, and matter had a beginning, they're the effect. That means the cause has to be what? Spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. What does that sound like? Sounds like God to me. Exactly. I wish I could go into that. So, he in 1929, actually, or he in 1931, came out to Hubble's telescope because Hubble was telling him about this red shift. And he essentially, after he was trying to like fudge around with the data because Einstein didn't even want to follow his theory all the way to its conclusion of a cosmic beginning, he finally went out and saw that red shift and he said, there's no other way that I can go. It has to be this way. And so then you get the theory of general relativity, which completely changed the way that we view science and our universe. And if anybody doubts that sort of theory, this is what Einstein would say to them. So, and you know what? let me see here. I had a slide. Let's see if it pops up. Yeah. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In the beginning. Isn't that what the Bible says? I just went through 5 lines of evidence for you to show you that the scientific evidence over the 20th century has pointed us to the fact that there was a great explosion. It was finely tuned. Our universe is expanding. And here's the crazy part that blows my mind. It's not just that we are expanding. It's that space itself is expanding. And my question is, what is it expanding into? Like, you can't expand into more space because we're talking about space itself. I don't have an answer to that question. That's what blows my mind. And that's what makes me look at God and go, you're awesome. Space itself is expanding, but there's nothing else. It'll give you mental constipation, you think about it, if you will. Right? Here's the next one. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 6 and 7. He says, the glory before time began. You see, you get these little hallmarks in Scripture. Like George said earlier, is Scripture a scientific book? No. Was it written to answer 21st century American scientific questions? No. But does it answer, or does it give us some hints of some, little scientific tidbits? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely it does. It doesn't contradict anything in science. Again, it tells us a lot of what God did, but it doesn't tell us a lot of how God did it. This is why we say that God has given us 2 books, the book of Revelation and the book of nature, right? Doesn't Romans 1 talk about that? All right, Robert Jastrow again, he says, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. Now, this guy's an agnostic. He does not believe in God. He has no axe to grind. He says the essential element in the astronomical and biblical account of Genesis is the same. Why would he say that? Because that's where the evidence is pointing. So again, I'm giving you quotes here about people who aren't Christians, and they're telling us that it's the same. Astronomers now find that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation, to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in the cosmos and the earth, and they have found that all that has happened is a product of forces they cannot hope to discover, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work, is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Pretty powerful, huh? And again, here's scientists who won Nobel Prizes, people who have no axe to grind in the religious world telling us the accounts that we find in nature and the accounts that we find in Genesis are the same, and it seems as if the world had a cosmic beginning. So my question is, why can't we take that surge and teach it in school and just let kids make up their own minds on whether there's a God or not? Is that a religious thing? Absolutely not. All right, I'll skip over those for you. We either have no one created something out of nothing or someone created something out of nothing. Those are the two choices that we're left with, right? That's it. And I think the second one makes more sense. Okay, let's go ahead and end there. We're going to take a 10-minute break for bathroom break. Terry, you need to say anything?
Just that the little booklets that George that was teaching out of.
Yes.
They're $2 a piece. Brenda has them back there if you want them. They are $2 a piece. So.
All righty. All right, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll start with the theological argument when you get back.